Shalom, and welcome to the Talking Memory International Lecture Series. My name is Medin Shachar, and I am an educator and guide at the Ghetto Fighters House, and will be your host for today's program. Listening as witnessing Dori Laub and the creation of the Fortunoff Archive. Today, all over the world, Jewish communities are preparing to celebrate the first night of Chanukah, the holiday of light. In Australia, the Jewish community was already starting to celebrate. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the devastating news we received today out of Australia. At a Chanukah event, a mass shooting has taken the lives of at least 11 people and dozens were wounded. In response, I invite us to all begin with a moment of silence to honor the victims, to stand in solidarity with their families and communities, and to mark the sanctity of human life. Please. Thank you. It was a difficult decision to decide whether to cancel today's program. Before learning about the tragedy in Australia, I prepared 2 slides in celebration of the first night of Hanukkah, which starts tonight. Now, in light of today's tragedy, they take on new meaning. I would like to share them because today's terrorist attack reminds us that Jewish life, whether in hiding, in rebuilding, or in public celebration, has often been lived in the shadow of threat. These images ask us not only to remember the past, but to recognize how present that vulnerability still is. The first slide is a drawing by Ori Kochba, who was born in Lisa, Poland in 1910. At 24, he immigrated to Palestine and joined Kibbutz Na'an, a communal settlement. And in 1938, he traveled to Holland to help Dutch Jews immigrate to Palestine. But his mission was cut short. Ori was arrested and imprisoned in several concentration camps where he remained until liberation in 1945. Throughout his imprisonment, he turned to art, as you can see, to document his experiences. And I think this drawing of the Chanukah reminds us just how important our heritage can be for a people. In the second slide, we see a Hanukkah celebration after the Holocaust, reflecting the rebuilding of Jewish life in the open without fear. So let us hope that all people, no matter what their religion, belief, or origin, will feel safe to openly practice their rituals and to wear symbols of their people. And now we will start today's event, which is the second program in our series, Conversations That Endure, in the footsteps of Henry Greenspan and Dori Laub. I also want to welcome our global audience with a special welcome to the survivors and their families that are with us today. We want to thank everyone for the support and interest in our programs. And this program is co-sponsored by the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies at Yale University, the Jean and Shmuel Frankel Center for Judaic Studies at the University of Michigan, the Holocaust Educational Foundation of Northwestern University, the Rabin Chair Forum at George Washington University, the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and Classrooms Without Borders. And I would like to thank the Fortunoff Archives for sponsoring the exclusive screening of The Listener. So I would like to invite our first speaker. Stephen Naron has worked as an archivist and librarian since 2003, when he received his MSIS, Masters of Science in Information Systems, right, Stephen? From the University of Texas in Austin. Stephen pursued a Magister in Jewish Studies and History at the Free University in Berlin and the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism at Technische Universität, also in Berlin. Stephen has worked with the Fortunoff Archive for more than 12 years, starting as an archivist. Now, as director of the Fortunoff Archive, Stephen works within the wider research community to share access to the collection through the Access Site program. The Ghetto Fighters House is a part of that program, as well as writing and presenting on testimony for conferences, symposiums, and class sessions inside and outside Yale. Stephen is also responsible for spearheading initiatives such as preservation and digital access to the collection, cooperative projects with other testimony collections, oversight of fellowship and research programs, and the production of the podcasts, ethnomusicological recordings, and I practiced that so hard, and the Archives documentary film series. And with that, it's an honor to introduce Stephen. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Medine. Thank you, Medine, for inviting me, and thank you again for opening this session with a moment of silence. We were texting earlier about what to do in light of the attack in Australia, and we did consider canceling. And we also felt like there's no really good right way to deal with something like this. So we went ahead with the plan to hold the event. But I would completely understand if others felt like they would just rather turn off their computers and their phones and light their Chanukah and be with their families at a time like this. I want to thank everyone at the Ghetto Fighters House for organizing the event. I've been an admirer of Lochamei Ghettot and the work you all do for some time. Last time I was in Israel, I had the opportunity to visit the archives, which are simply incredible. And if you haven't visited the archive or the museum, you must do so on your next trip. I've always seen a kind of family resemblance between Lochamei and Fortunoff, separated obviously in time and place, but similar in many ways. After all, here we have two institutions, both of them with roots in the survivor community, both as institutions of memory built by survivors to document the Holocaust and its aftermath, to commemorate lost families, lost communities, the attempt to wipe out an entire civilization, as well as the resistance to that attempt. Both were constructed with the hope that gathering this documentation was essential, that people must know more, and they must hear from the survivors, and that the memories held in these archives might help the next generation to learn from the past. Both Lochamei, Ghettot, and Fortunoff were founded early, that is relative to their respective national institutions of memory. Lochamei predated Yad Vashem by several years. Fortunoff predated the construction of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum by more than a decade. Both continue to do their pioneering work as a smaller institution in the shadow of larger state-funded siblings. And both of them emerged at a time when this memory work was still being done by and for survivors themselves. They were both early attempts at documenting and commemorating the Holocaust at a time prior to the post-memory generation. And although I'm staunchly in that post-memory generation, I do consider myself quite lucky to have had the opportunity to meet and work with Dori, to meet Jeffrey and Renee, get to know them, and many of the founders' families, as well as other key figures in the archives establishment, some of which are in the audience here today, like Dana Klein and Sandy Rosenstock and Joanne Rudolph, and others like Larry Langer, who are no longer with us. All of these people helped create and build the Fortunoff Archive into the institution that it is today. I'm probably the last person to have the honor of stewarding this collection with some kind of relationship like this. And it's one of the primary motivating factors behind my sense of obligation to this collection and to build on the foundations that my predecessors established and to try to do my best to project their work into the 21st century. Jeffrey Hartman made it very clear to Joanne and very clear to me just how important it was for him to make this collection available to the wider research community. And if it wasn't for Joanne's tireless effort to record and catalog, digitize, and preserve this collection, none of the work that we now do with this digital archive would be possible. And I'm happy to say, and I wish Jeffrey could see this, that the archive in digital form is now available at more than 330 access sites worldwide. There are tens of thousands of uses of this collection every year on every continent, with the exception of Antarctica. It is available free of charge to anyone interested in using the collection in teaching and research. In fact, we just signed an agreement with the university system in Argentina, which I hope will help to make the collection available at dozens of state-funded universities across the country. So if you're here listening in from an institution of higher learning, a museum, or a research center, and you're not yet an access site, please get in touch. Besides the Access Site program, another key pillar of our effort to ensure the archive remains in use and relevant is to turn the traditional role of an archive on its head. Rather, flip the idea that an archive is a repository for researchers where they can turn as a source for raw materials for their own work. Rather than waiting for researchers to come to us, we are coming to them and on an international scale. And we're using our resources to activate the collection in a wide array of disciplines by encouraging use of the archive in teaching and research, but also in cultural production and public history. That means not just providing raw materials to various projects when asked, but actually inviting specific scholars and artists into the archive to do work. In today's world, funding for projects like this is becoming increasingly scarce. Our support can make some projects that might not happen otherwise become a reality. The film that you've just seen, or hopefully will see, about Dori, the listener, is one such effort supported by the archive. Ohad Ufaz and Micha Livne, the filmmakers behind the listener, were Laurel Vlach filmmakers in residence at the Fortunoff Archive in 2023. Now, I know we are here to discuss and celebrate Dori's work and legacy. And you've all seen the film or will see the film, and Ohad will discuss his relationship to Dori and the emergence of the film later. But I want to make it clear that I did not know Dori well, but the man I did meet was a kind, humble, and soft-spoken one. And I'm certain he would want us to temper any tendency with an important reminder that he did not do this alone. This archive, its methodology, its growth, its contributions to scholarship, to memorial culture, to education was not due to one person alone. Rather, and this again is one of the remarkable things about this archive, it was thanks to a community. The archive was built by a community of survivors and fellow travelers in New Haven. It was very much a grassroots group effort, mostly a group of volunteers. The archive certainly would not exist without Dori, but it wouldn't exist without Laurel Vlach or Jeffrey Hartman or William Rosenberg. It wouldn't be here without Eli Evans or Malcolm Weber or Renee Hartman or any of the other first four witnesses that volunteered to speak in front of a camera in 1979 when Laurel and Dori approached them for interviews, but still had absolutely no idea what they were doing. Dori could never have imagined this initial taping in his office on Howard Avenue in New Haven would lead to the international documentation project spanning more than 4 decades. But don't take my word for it. I invite you all to listen to Dori himself.
The idea of videotaping is really thanks to Laurel Vlach. I wanted to record, but I didn't have a clear idea. And the video was just at that time becoming much more popular and technically affordable. And in 1979, I think it was sometimes in the spring, Laurel contacted me and asked me to give an interview for Yom HaShoah about my life. I knew of her work. I watched the program on Jerry Kosinski, so I was familiar with her approach. And not long before that, I was on television, the series Holocaust. I do not remember at this moment who was the producer, but it was very annoying to other survivors and to me. And I said to Laurel I would be only willing to be interviewed if we think of interviewing many survivors and perhaps producing a movie like The Sorrow and the Pity. I don't think that I didn't think that she took me seriously. And to my great surprise, a few months later, there was a phone call. I have a crew for tonight. Can you get space and can you get survivors? I mean, in the media, everything is 1, 2, 3. There's not planning. And one thing led to another, and then I realized that we didn't have to ask questions. We simply had to allow the survivors to speak and to keep a time frame so that they weren't going back and forth, but continuing with their story. And I think already after Eva Benda, we realized that this is something that more than we expected. I assume that the interview was probably an hour or so. We thought that this was the length of an interview, so we didn't. We tried to keep it within a certain framework. It was probably a little more than an hour. But as it proceeded through the evening, we were more and more astonished.
Thanks. So there you have it, from Dori himself, and recording with Joanne Rudolph was the interview on that recording, which is a much longer recording. Obviously, this is just 2 minutes, but even in a couple of minutes of this testimony, you hear there's so much information about the motivation, the nature of these early testimonies where it was all ad hoc. And also this idea, which Jeffrey Hartman wrote about, that testimony was born both cinematic and counter cinematic at the same time, both a reaction to popular cultural representation, but as well in still a use of the same media, as we're looking towards toward the sorrow and the pity as a model for the work they were doing. So while a group effort, it was undeniably Dori's unique perspective as a survivor and clinical psychiatrist that shaped the archive's distinctive methodology, with a focus on empathic listening rather than journalistic interviews. And in fact, in an interview with Yad Vashem, Laub described his approach to interviews and the connection to his work in psychoanalysis as this, and this is a quote: "The most difficult experiences sometimes are never spoken of before someone decides to give testimony. There is a certain need that people have for someone to hear their story and for a connection and correlation to be made. It's not a newspaper interview or historical interview. It's not only about the facts, but it's about facts embedded in so much memory and so much pain and terror. Through psychoanalysis, you facilitate this and make it happen. And sometimes intuitively or because of a personal connection, you know how to respond or wait or make a comment and keep the flow." Dori described as emerging from an interview in which an empathic environment has been created. Testimonies, he does this, he writes, by forming what he calls a, quote, contract between two people, one of whom is going to engage in a narration of her trauma through the unfolding of her life account. Implicitly, the listener says to the testified, for this limited time, throughout the duration. I just wanted to say that we have this film, The Listener, have the 3 interviews of Dori, one together with his mother in our archive. And I hope that this, from its efforts to document mass violence and genocide through the first-person accounts. It's a terrible, terrible reflection of the times we're living in, that the Fortunoff Archive, more than ever, is receiving inquiries to serve as on advisory boards. That's why I'm in Berlin now, I'm speaking at an advisory board meeting for an organization of Roma activists who are recording testimonies of survivors in Ukraine, that we're being approached for similar projects every week. So with that, I hope that Dori's empathic approach to interviewing, that it's his hope that with compassion and listening, that listening with compassion was not some sign of weakness, but strength, something that we all need to be reminded of in a world like this that's plagued by attention deficit and a tyranny of the loudest, angriest voices, usually on the margins, pushing out the more silent, reasonable majority. So with that, I'll hand things over to Ohad. And again, thank you for your patience.
First of all, thank you, Stephen. I just want to say that Stephen is not at home. He's in a hotel room. So like he said, he's in Berlin. So he just arrived. And I really appreciate, even if it was crappy internet, we got the message. So thank you again. And I do hope to see you in Israel soon. And with that, I do want to move on to our second speaker, Dr. Ohad Ufaz, who is co-founder and head of documentary and film in Edut 710, I think that's how we say it in English, 710, and Chair of Communications Department in Oranim College of Education. He is an award-winning international filmmaker and a film scholar expertise in the ethics of testimony and documentary film. His last film, The Listener, which hopefully many of you saw already, it was co-directed with Micha Livne and was premiered in the Haifa International Film Festival in 2024. And with that, I will hand over the floor to Ohad.
Thank you. I'm very excited and happy to be here to meet with such a big audience. I think it's the first screening of The Listener to international public, and it wouldn't happen unless Medin was so insistent, and the whole project wouldn't happen unless Stephen and Fortunoff Archive supported this challenging project. As you can imagine, those who saw it and those who would watch later, it's not such a popular TV kind of show to film Dori Laub, 80 years old, almost 80 years old when we started the project back in 2015. A man that hardly, I would say he would rather listen also when we came to interview him than to speak to us. So sometimes it was pretty much challenging to interview. We would come, we have some questions prepared and some thoughts about the scene, and then he would ask something like, "Okay, and how are you today?" and would look with this look he has in his eyes, and you could only start and speak about yourself, and we found ourselves in an instant in a treatment, telling our stories of the day and the challenges of the period, and therefore it was challenging to make this film, and it wouldn't happen without the partnership of Micha Livne as co-director, and other people who contributed a lot to this film, like the editor and Shelach. A big challenge here was to interweave the archive material of the testimonies that Laub took already since 1979, and to bring forth the deep concept of compassionate listening, and that's the aim of this project. I'd like to share some pictures, so I'll be more visual and I'll feel more comfortable about it. Okay, I like to introduce myself with this picture on the left side. It's very typical for me, being among my students in Oranim College for Education. My students are students for filmmaking and communications, and it's very typical for me to stand behind the camera and to look for the focus or the shutter speed and so on. This moment that was filmed by Micha Livne was for me a life-changing moment when Dori came to lead this testimony workshop on 2018, just a few months before he passed away. And this look in his eyes very much focused on the student just telling her story or giving her very slight testimony. I would say she's the daughter of immigrants from USSR to Israel, and she was talking about her experience in the army. But I think from this moment on, I changed my way of teaching, focusing more on listening, or giving the first lesson for me since this workshop, and since following Dori for 4 years, the last 4 years of his life. Since then, listening is the first lesson for me and for my students into the world of media making, in an attempt to make another kind of media. And I think Stephen related to it in quoting Jeffrey Hartman about the relation between testimony and media. Micha Livne joined me on this project. It was 2014. He just published his screened his film on telling the story of his personal story from the Lebanon War, and he was very interested in the idea of testimony for trauma. The film name is Sipur Sagur, closed story. I believe this would be the translation. And when I told him, we went at the cafe, when I told him the idea of making a film about Dori, as challenging as it could be, he joined right away. He's a very practical guy. I'm more on the scholarly side of this project, and he immediately made an appointment with Dori. He went to the States, met with him. It was just a few months before his wife passed away. Dori's wife passed away, and therefore Dori couldn't be filmed just on the spot. But a year afterwards, 2015, he came over to Lochamei Agetaot. Anat Livne, Micha's wife, was the head of Lochamei Agetaot museum, Bet Lochamei Agetaot. So for Dori, it was also like, I would say, a second home in Israel. And many of the first scenes of the film were taken in Lochamei Agetaot House Museum. I would like to go a little bit backwards to my interest in Dori's concept. So, and it goes back to the first media and moving pictures testimonies that were taken already in the when the American troops came to Dachau. Only a few days, I think the day of the liberation of Dachau was the April the 30th of April 45. So 7 days afterwards, George Stevens stand in front of a group of prisoners. Not everybody here are Jews. You can see the tall guy is, as you can imagine, a Dutch priest. But within the frame of the clapper, we can see Mietek Dortheimer, and he speaks what I believe is one of the first testimonies that was already recorded and could be found in the collection of the museum, the Holocaust Museum, American Holocaust Museum. So since then, this was a very special attempt to record sound and picture at the same time. This testimony was part of the Nuremberg trial, and already back then, testimony was somehow a linkage between media and trial, giving the testimony as a struggle against denial and silencing. And it went, of course, the Eichmann trial is very known for it, and the use of testimonies there. And I would like to jump to the latest stage of this short history and put Laub's concept in the other pole of Lanzmann concept, as could be seen in Shoah. If I draw on the ideas of Emmanuel Levinas, which I was trying hard in my research of the ethics of documentary filmmaking, I could put Lanzmann on the pole of justice, of social justice, historical justice, and Dori Laub's Dori's approach, which is very, very unique in the area of in the realm of filmmaking and media making, on the pole of proximity, which is in his words, being absolutely for the witness. This approach is, I think, very vivid also nowadays, as we can see testimonies, new testimonies. My example is of Eli Sharabi's testimony in Uvda. So again, you can see that Laub's emphasize on the well-being of the survivors during the testimony before any attempt for justice or historical understanding is very, very unique to our times. And for me as a filmmaker and as someone who strived to learn and teach the ethics of documentary filmmaking and media, Laub's, Dori's approach was important, although, as was mentioned before, Dori knew almost nothing about cameras, editing, filmmaking, and it was maybe a coincidence that she joined Laura Vlok on that special evening on 79. But I think since then something extremely powerful was formed between his compassionate listening and the role of the camera documenting not only the talk of the witness, but also the eyes and the face expression, which is so important for testimony. So just a few quotes of Dori that still that I use in every lecture of mine, and also in the work of Edut, which is Edut is testimony in Hebrew, Edut 710. This project that was initiated in 8th of October, just a day after 7th of October 2023, and keep on practicing the methods and the legacy of Dori. For testimonial process to take place, there needs to be bonding, the intimate and total presence of an other in the position of one who hears. The witnesses are talking to somebody they have been waiting for a long time. For me, this idea that the witnesses would like to share their story, that they would wait for it. I needed Dori's approval for it. I needed his support for it in order to send my students to listen to stories in their communities. I sent my students in Oranim bring stories from second, third generation to the Holocaust, Israel-Palestinian wars, from the Arab-Palestinian Society, from the kibbutz, from the Ma'abara. But they all have to practice listening. And we encounter every time this waiting for the listener in every community that, and whenever they bring the story, I think this sentence proves also educationally that if a young student listens to his grandmother or to his grandfather, his neighbor, and he has to listen to the testimony, he can develop some kind of bonding and intimate presence, and develop ability for compassion even in an early stage. So it goes also the other way around. Another quote, important quote of Dori is this quote that emphasizes the partnership, the fact that the witnesses, the traumatic survivors, are accompanied in a journey they couldn't make by themselves back to the wounded past, to the wounded memories or experiences. So therefore, the listener, the interviewer, is not only a carrier of or that shares trauma. The listener enables the survivor, and we encountered it so many times also in Edut 710, to go back to the places of loneliness, because the experience of survival is an extreme experience of loneliness. Even if you're in the same safe room in the or of course during the Holocaust, there are so many examples for that, but we saw it also in the families that we interviewed that were in the same safe room during the 7th of October attack. Couples and children, and so every family member had his own experience, and sometimes they didn't share it with each other for long months, and you could feel this privilege, I would say, of us as interviewer to be those who would accompany those survivors for the first time in this journey. Just a few words about Edut 710. It was established, as I said, just a few days after the 7th of October. Our first digital encounters were already during this day. It was a civilian initiative. The first group was gathered from people who documented the protest, movement, but many from other sides of Israeli society joined: teachers, filmmakers, historians, psychologists, and so on.
אנחנו מעדות 710.
תספר מה שאתה רוצה.
רציתי לבקש מעידן שישתמש בנשק עליי. שלא ייתן להם לקחת אותי, אבל לא יכולתי. הוא הילד.
הייתי בטוחה שכולם מתים, שהילדים שלי מתים. כאילו לא ידעתי שיש אופציה לצאת מזה בחיים.
ובשלב מסוים זורקים פנימה רימוני רסס לתוך המיגונית.
אני מזהה דמות מולי, ממש בשבריר שנייה.
פתח עליי באש.
ב7 לאוקטובר אני הפסקתי להיות בן אדם פרטי. אבל אם הפכתי להיות חלק מההיסטוריה של מדינת ישראל, לפחות בזה תרמתי משהו.
So it's of course very complicated to bring the legacy that was formed after the Holocaust. Laub and Vlok and Fortunoff and other project came to the survivors so many years afterwards, and we were there only a few days when the trauma was still very much in process, and we had doubts, big doubts, but we understood the testimony, the concept of testimony and of media changed, and things are much more rapid nowadays. People were giving their testimonies by themselves straight to the media channels from the safe room and while running from the fields of the Nova massacre. So we had to be there for those who wanted to speak. Otherwise, they would speak to the social media, and we didn't want them to speak with no listener to this big void of social media. We had to take a protocol, an interview protocol that was much more extreme, I would say. We didn't ask questions. We just structured the testimony interview, asking, following Dori's approach, asking about the days when the skies were blue, which is a very much European metaphor. In Israel, the skies are blue, but sometimes it's terrible. So we were asking about Sukkot and Simchat Torah and the 6th of October 2023. And then we would ask the witness to go, after introducing themselves, of course, to speak about 7th of October, and there was hardly any need for questions. And if there were any, and if there are any, we leave it to the end of the interview. So we listen with no interruptions. We listen with to everybody with no hierarchies, everybody who were there, those who went out to fight and those who stayed at the safe room, and those who sometimes feel they have no story. For us, it's important it is very important to learn the story, to listen to the story. What we do differently is we edit the testimonies, of course, asking for the survivors' permission, and they can give their veto at every stage. They can decide to leave the testimony only for archive or only for research, or even to delete it. It's for their decision, and I would say that more than 90% of our witnesses would like us to publish their testimony as soon as possible. So a big attempt here is to edit testimonies into length, short extract 5 minutes and full-length testimony and to publish it as soon as possible, because what we found out that most of the witnesses that learned about the Holocaust, learned about testimony and its importance, they see themselves on the battle of or the trying to fight against denial and silencing, and even attempt to forget that we see also in the Israeli society that sometimes is too tired to listen further. They want us to publish. So I will end this part with inviting you to join and look for Edut 710 in your through Google, find it, and sometimes watch some of the testimonies and bring another circles of listeners, because for them, audiences and audiences abroad are very important. We published already almost 1,000 testimonies. Only more than 100 are translated to English, but I hope more and more would be in the coming future. Thank you.
And thank you, Ohad. Actually, Ohad was last year, and we have a recording, and you can look for it on our YouTube channel. He talks specifically about Edut 710. So we've already had a discussion, but what I thought was so interesting, and that's why I invited you, is that I saw a clip of the listener here on my Kibbutz Yigo Micha Livne, your co-director and producer, was showing, he was talking about the Edut 700 project, but he was also showing clips from the listener, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to watch it when it was at the Ghetto Fighter's house, so I really wanted to see it. But I think that what I understood was that without a premonition in 2016, you're sitting with Dori Laub, you're actually recording his life story, and to preserve his legacy without knowing that at some point that you're listening to him was going to help you to listen to survivors of October 7th. And I was going to ask the question, but you already answered, that the Israelis are so aware of testimony from the Holocaust that they knew how important it was for them to speak. And I always wonder, when I was living in Israel about 9/11, I wasn't in the States when it happened. I had a lot of friends that were in one of the places, and I never really knew, were people talking on the news like we do in Israel, were survivors, talking about their experiences. And here, every day for the past 2 years and 2 months, survivors are speaking and they're being interviewed and they're writing books. So it really is an extension of what you're doing. So thank you so much for that. I'm looking for questions. There was one question that I saw early on, and I think you answered that as well. The whole idea of time elapsing, is that one of the reasons why maybe it was easier to have testimony, to give testimony for survivors when they were older? And that's a question actually for both Stephen and for you, or maybe more for Stephen because he runs the archives. If starting these interviews in the 70s was something that was more possible to do, also because of the media, but also because time had elapsed. It's a completely different situation with October 7th, with Ohad, where people were ready to speak right away through the trauma. With the Holocaust survivors, we knew that there were a lot of blockades until they were able to do it. So Stephen, I don't know if you can answer with your internet, but the question is really interesting.
I can try until Stephen will try and say that yeah, time has changed so much since, but also technology. I mean, video technology wasn't available before it. And what one side of the innovation of Laub and Vlok and the others was to harness this tool in order to expand listening and to make circles of listening. So if I document the survivor and listens, and then family can watch the tape, and then the community, and then it can goes on TV and to schools and so on. So I think this idea was, and it was still innovating also in the late 70s. Nowadays it's hard to, so it was a breakthrough, and in a way early. I know there were, I know from Amit Pinchevsky that during the late 70s, there were some trends also after the trauma of Vietnam, and also the series that Laub mentions, the Holocaust series, that brought reaction. They wanted to counter reaction, the over dramatizing of Holocaust by the pure and I don't know if pure reality but there is something cleaner, less dramatized about testimony that puts the like in Edut 710, one of the first things we decided of is to put aside our artistic or cinematic ego. We're not Claude Lanzmann. We're not making reconstructions, and of course not dramatizing with actors and so on. So I think it was needed back then in the late 70s, and something evolved, but it was still a big breakthrough, and it took more than 10 years for Spielberg to start, only in the beginning of mid-90s to start his big project, and also Yad Vashem, it took some time, so it was a breakthrough.
It was, you're right, Ohad. I'll try to jump in, and hopefully I won't break up. But I think it's important though to mention that I have to push back a little bit on what both of you are suggesting, that there is a sort of silence that ends somehow in the 1970s, that the Fortunoff Video Archive contributes to some kind of breaking the silence. But the fact is that the victims and the survivors were documenting what was happening to them and speaking about it openly, and recording first-person accounts during the war on an enormous scale in the immediate post-war period, by survivor organizations themselves, the historical commissions across Europe. So the idea that there was a silence is unfounded. Of course, you can read Assia Diner's book as well, about the American context and memorialization commemoration in the United States. So it's more about whether the society around them was interested and was willing to listen than it was whether they were willing to speak. Survivors were always talking to one another about their experiences. So I would push back a little bit on that. I would say that the 1970s was certainly an inflection point for other reasons, right? But you could say the same thing about Eichmann, right? You could say that the Eichmann trial is really the moment where the survivor bursts in audiovisual form, bursts onto the scene. So, pinpointing when this media version, or the idea of the survivor as a witness, as someone who should be listened to by a wider audience, it emerges over time, but it doesn't have anything to do with themselves' willingness to speak, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I don't see questions and I do see comments that you can look at, but especially about the point whether people didn't want to listen to Holocaust survivors, and maybe that was also something that arose later. But Ohad said that he's teaching his students to listen based on Dori Laub's technique. And of course, people come to Fortunoff and use it around the world now also to listen. And I'm just wondering, because Hank Greenspan is with us, and he mentions, like we're in the TikTok age, right? People don't have time to really just talk about things or to listen to anyone for a period of time. And I'm just wondering, from your both experiences, Ohad as a teacher and Stephen is the director of the archives, if you feel that there is a sense that the younger generation is listening. We were talking about this before we started, with ChatGPT, they don't even have to think anymore. So are they actually listening to testimonies and also listening to people give testimony? So the question again is for both of you.
I work with students. It's challenging nowadays. Not only young students, I think all of us are exposed to rapid media, and I think we are all challenged with the ability to focus, and that's why I believe that Laub's lesson is so extremely important, especially in the realm of media, because media is part of this problem, but also a place to generate listening. And so I do any attempt I can. That's why I teach students for education. I do any attempt to make the circles grow. One thing that we achieved when Dori was still alive, when he came over, was to write his Wikipedia page. And he was very happy to read it for the first time. And we were stunned that it wasn't before we wrote it. We, of course, many contributed afterwards. But and I'm happy to say with Dut, okay, it's a tragic event. But what happened with the Dut 710 is that so many people, also the accountant of the organization and those who do just the video cover and so on, they all speak about Dori Laub and give lectures about Laub and listening. And I think somehow something good that came from this tragedy was that the concept of testimony became relevant on an actual level. And that's what I found out in testimony. I think there's so many young people now in Israel that needs to share their testimonies from 7th of October and from the war, and of course the Arab society and what happens on the other side of the fence. And there's so much listening work we have to do, and so much work with the media. So I think this is something that we have to work hard to bring forth.
Hank Greenspan, like I said, is with us, and if we can unmute him.
I am.
Looks like there you go. Hi.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. It's very brief. I think one of the lessons of this program and a little last is everyone should be a shrink, and then we'd know how to listen.
I wanted to ask the question about that.
A hell of a lot. I mean, it does, and you can see. I love the film, I have to say, about Dori. But you can see, especially if you've been there, how that matters in terms of listening. But beyond that, I do think students. I think of my own students over the years, and what I am almost proudest of is that kids say, as much as they learned about survivors and the Holocaust more widely, they learned about listening. And that's a lesson that they took to other parts of their lives, in other relationships, entirely non-traumatic contexts. But they learned what it means and what it takes to listen with care and patience, etc., which I think is epitomized in Dori's work, I would say in the best of mine. And I do think there's almost a relief when it's almost like playing with wooden toys, that like we're going to put the electric stuff away in the devices and we're going to do something really old school, which is just engage. And I really do think there's a gift in that my students, at least, I think many more, appreciate the opportunity. Just have to sort of open the door. So
you have to open the door, don't you? Sort of like a telephone, right? They don't know what a telephone is, so I'm kind of thinking, do they really know what it is to sit down and listen? But
yeah, Nadine, I just want to say, in fact, it's so bad to this discussion of attention span and listening that the Fortunoff Video Archive is preparing to release a new educational curriculum titled "The Art of Listening," which is a focus not so much on the history of the Holocaust from 1933 to 1945 to sort of cram facts and figures into the heads of high school students, but a reflection on the Fortunoff method and the reflection on what it means to truly listen to the victims, to witnesses, and it includes excerpts of presentations by Larry Langer and Joanne Rudolph and Dana Klein, and excerpts from Laurel and Jeffrey and Dori. And so I'm hopeful that this type of approach to, let's say, Holocaust education, where we start with the sort of fundamentals of listening and thinking about how to think historically, what are sources, how to think critically about sources, as a sort of stepping stone to bigger picture questions about the history of the Holocaust. That's what we're going to attempt to do with this next curriculum module we'll release, hopefully this month.
Great.
Well, that also answers the question about what's the new thing going on with research with testimonies, but I think it's more a curriculum, which is also important. Hank, yes, I interrupted you.
No, I was just saying great.
Yeah, it is great. It is.
And obviously, without knowing how to listen, we're all screwed. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
I mean, what else can emerge that's good if that isn't happening on whatever level? I can't think of much.
Yeah, well, actually, Miriam wrote something. Unfortunately speaking, as a psychologist and therapist trained 50 years ago, there was never any education about how to listen. This may have improved more recently, but I don't believe it's considered as fundamental as Hank or I do, which makes sense, right?
Hank spoke about listening with care, and I think it's not only about listening, because you can find methods of listening in the business making and listening in management, but listening with care and compassion, this is the thing. And I would, what we do, Hank, you send your students to listen with care. What we do is we send them with the toys, with their mobile phones, and to harness it for digital recording and to make other circles of listening while editing. And there is an editor here, Onit Barkai. She's a great editor in Enut 710. Hi, Onit. She edited more than 100 testimonies. It means she watches 1 hour testimony, correct it, and then makes a 5 minutes version of it. And I think in this respect, we can join this world of digital toys and not only put it aside. So that's what we try to contribute to this great idea of listening with care.
Agreed. Absolutely. I'm just trying, there it is. Actually, someone just wrote, thank you, Joanna Gilbert is with us. And she said, as Elie Wiesel told us, whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. And hopefully we are able to pass on 2 legacies, actually, Henry Greenspan's and Dori Laub's, and that was the whole purpose of our program. People are invited to read the conversation In the chat box, and with that, I want to say my final words for the program, my closing remarks, and as we come to the close of this program, and I want to thank both speakers and also Hank for coming in as well. We return to what Dori Laub taught us so insistently and so quietly. That testimony does not exist without a listener. That's what we've been saying. Memory is not something carried alone. It comes into being in relationship, in the presence of someone willing to listen with responsibility, patience, and, as Hank said, care. This insight also guided the first program in this two-part series, which centered on Henry Greenspan's decades-long conversations with Holocaust survivors. Greenspan reminded us that testimony unfolds over time through sustained dialogue, trust, and collaboration, and that what survivors choose to share and how they understand their own legacies is never fixed but continually shaped within human relationships. Together, these two programs trace a shared ethical path, from Greenspan's emphasis on enduring conversation to Laub's insistence on the listener as witness. We see a common commitment to memory as living, relational process, one that binds past and present, survivor and listener, voice and responsibility. Through Stephen Naron's reflections and through Ohad Ufaz and Micha Livne's moving documentary, The Listener, we have been reminded that Laub's work was not only about preserving the past, but about making it speak to the present, and we see that with Edut 710. His commitment to listening was an ethical act, one that affirmed the survivor's voice and restored dignity where history sought to erase it. In a world still marked by violence, denial, and rupture, the legacies of both Greenspan and Laub challenge us. They ask us not only to remember, but to listen, not only to bear witness, but to become witnesses ourselves, to hold memory with integrity and to pass it on. Thank you for joining us in this act of listening and for being part of the Talking Memory series. May the voices we encountered across these two programs continue to resonate, and may we carry forward the shared conviction that attentive listening, sustained, ethical, and humane, is itself a form of responsibility and hope. Shalom, and may we all have a meaningful holiday season with the ones that we hold dearest. On behalf of the Ghetto Fighters House, we thank you for joining us this evening. As an institution founded by survivors, we remain committed to preserving testimony, fostering dialogue, and ensuring that memory is not only transmitted, but truly heard across generations and in the face of an ever-changing present. Happy holidays and New Year to all. We will meet again in 2020.